Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily.
Everybody seemed to see a train wreck coming, but nobody seemed to know what to do about it.
The defendant psychiatrist takes the stand for the defense in the Olympian attempted murder trial out of New Jersey. Plus, new details could lead to answers in the unsolved murders out of Delphi, Indiana.
The most important thing here is finding out who perpetrated this horrible crime. That's what everybody wants.
And Ohio versus William Husel.
I'm just trying to make sure the trial's fair.
Ahead of closing arguments, we hear from the judge presiding over the case. But first, a verdict is handed down in the Sarah Lawrence College sex cult federal trial. Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. A verdict is reached in the Sarah Lawrence sex cult case in New York City. Not surprisingly, the accused cult leader, Lawrence Ray, was found guilty on all counts. A jury found the 62-year-old defendant guilty of a 15-count indictment of federal charges related to the manipulation and extortion of a group of Sarah Lawrence College students. Prosecutors say Ray befriended the students back in 2010 when he began living with his daughter, who was a student at the college. In all, Ray faced 17 charges, including racketeering, extortion, sex trafficking, forced labor, and money laundering. 2 counts were dropped by the end of the trial for technical reasons. Several of Ray's victims testified throughout the trial, telling jurors of the physical and mental abuse Ray forced upon them, including victim Claudia Jury, who testified to becoming a sex worker at Ray's urging. Ray's defense tried to argue he took millions of dollars juror earned doing sex work at an attorney's advice, saying it was restitution for Jury allegedly trying to poison him. The mountain of evidence and exhibits against Ray led to the jury spending just a few hours deliberating on Wednesday and returning a guilty verdict. Ray faces life in prison for his alleged crimes. He's set to be sentenced in September. Joining us today is Law and Crime legal analyst Dr. Tracy Pearson and co-host Terry Austin. Dr. Pearson, considering the amount of evidence, do you think maybe, I don't know, it was a bit of a quick verdict? Or were you shocked at all at the timing and how quickly the jury came back with a guilty verdict?
Absolutely not. I'm not shocked at all. And here's why. The documentary evidence that linked the defendant to the crimes, as well as his own visual appearance in these videos, corroborated the witness's testimony. And the witness testimony was absolutely emotionally damning and convincing for the jury. I can't imagine that in that jury room, they were spending much time deliberating and in fact spent most of their time filling out the verdict form. I mean, I would agree as well. And Terry, I always have this conversation with you. I wish I could be a fly on the wall in the deliberation rooms. What do you think was going on in that room as jurors were hashing out the verdict?
You know what? I agree with Dr. Pearson. There's no question that that verdict was going to come back the way it did. There was a ton of evidence, particularly those videos. They were extremely disturbing, and I think they remembered all of that, and they couldn't get that out of their minds. They probably also were going through some of the testimony, but they went through it very quickly. They could not forget Claudia Jury, who was up on that stand for days, and the fact that the brothers and sisters, the Rosario siblings, also were on the stand. They probably looked at some of that testimony and talked about that as well. But frankly, Brian, I think it was a foregone conclusion. They knew that it was going to come back guilty. This was definitely a ton of evidence against him.
Yeah, in a case like this, I don't mean to make light of a case like this, but oftentimes they say it takes them longer to get lunch than it does for them to decide a guilty verdict here, and I think that maybe is why it took a few hours. But we'll keep you updated on the Lawrence Ray case as sentencing is coming up in September. And a Florida judge rules the jury will tour the inside of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, as part of the sentencing phase for defendant Nikolas Cruz. On February 14, 2018, Cruz opened fire in the school, killing 17 people and injuring 17 more. After the shooting spree, parts of the high school were blocked off and have been since. In the following years, the crime scene has actually been preserved, still showing bullet holes, dried blood, and Valentine's Day's gifts that were left behind by fleeing students. In the first week of jury selection, Judge Elizabeth Schreier ruled it would be, quote, useful and proper for the jury to tour the scene. Something you'll be able to see because, of course, the Law and Crime Network is set to cover the sentencing phase live with gavel-to-gavel coverage when it begins on May 31st. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, more than 5 years after 2 young girls are murdered, new answers could be revealed in the Delphi double homicide case. But first, closing arguments delayed for the 3rd time in the trial of ex-ICU doctor William Husel. Still ahead, Anjanette Levy sits down with the judge presiding over the case. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. Once again, closing arguments in the trial of William Husel have been pushed back, delayed until Thursday, at least we hope. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy spoke with the judge overseeing the case and tells us what's being said about the delay.
Brian, this is Judge Michael Holbrook's 18th year on the bench. Before that, he told me he was a trial lawyer for 23 years. Now, Holbrook says he has tried high-profile cases in the past, but the William Husel case is more unique because of the issues involved and the science. This is a doctor, of course, accused of murdering 14 patients. Dr. Husel says that he was providing comfort care to those patients at the ICU at Mount Carmel Hospital in Columbus, but he prescribed doses of fentanyl that the prosecutors say were actually lethal. And the prosecution says that some of these patients were not even exhibiting signs of pain.
You have to handle it like every other case. Everybody else has the same rights, so that part's the same. It's a little bit more complex issues, but, I can't treat it like it's anything special. I just have to try the case, make it a fair trial. Most of the evidence is in the medical records, and clearly he ordered the injections. It comes down to what was his intent when he did it, and were they lethal doses? That's what the jury's basically dealing with. I mean, that's the big issue is, did he purposely cause the death of another? And yeah, he's a doctor who deals in death, but that's still the basic issue here.
Now, closing arguments are scheduled for Thursday morning. I asked Judge Holbrook's staff attorney what was going on with these multiple delays. The only thing she would tell me was that they were still working through some issues. And when I spoke with Judge Holbrook, he told me that there are about 30,000 pages of medical records in this case, and that it would take some time to go through the exhibits that would be sent to the jury. So we don't know if that might have been a part of this delay, but obviously we'll have those closing arguments covered for you when they happen. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Let's bring back legal analyst Dr. Tracy Pearson and Terry Austin as the court tries to lock down when closing arguments will start in Husel. Terry, eventually we'll have closing arguments. And when we do, what do you think will be the strongest arguments on either side?
I think the strongest argument for the prosecution is going to be the fact that he used fentanyl when most people used other opioids like morphine, and the amount of fentanyl that he used was very excessive. And they had the members of the families who died, frankly, up there testifying, saying that they felt as though they were coerced, they were manipulated, and so that's going to work for the prosecution. I think the strongest argument that the defense has is the fact that this was comfort care. People understand, and the jury might understand, that at the end of life, you want comfort care. You don't want to see your family member going through any sort of pain. And he was well regarded. Dr. Husel was respected by his colleagues. So I also think that will play a factor in favor of the defense.
Yeah, now, Dr. Pearson, it's not for a lack of trying, because Anjanette has been all over this, trying to speak to clerks, the judges, about what could possibly be pushing this case back. So let's speculate. What do you think it could be?
Well, if I take out my crystal ball, it could come down to they are working through jury instructions. What will those instructions say when the judge instructs the jury on the law? Because there's a lot of science, and there are issues with the science, as the judge discussed. The second thing that they could be talking about is demonstratives. The number of exhibits are huge, and trying to figure out what exhibits are going to be used as demonstratives in each closing may be the issue. I wouldn't hold out, though, that the idea that possibly that they could, in fact, be talking about potential plea deal. That is always a possibility in a situation like this.
Oh, maybe we got a last minute or 11th hour plea. Anjanette, give us a little bit more. What did Judge Holbrook have to say about the lawyers for the prosecution and the defense?
You know, it's funny, Brian. I asked him, I said to him, some people think you were really annoyed by Jose Baez. And he's like, I'm not annoyed by Jose Baez or really any of the other lawyers. He said really he was upset at times by some of the behavior in the courtroom. He said it was addressed. And he said it's interesting to watch the different personalities and the dynamics between these lawyers, particularly Diane Menashe and Jose Baez, the defense attorneys.
All right, well, good thing we got that interview, because I would have thought that he had some issues with Jose Baez, but of course, he's telling us otherwise. Well, thank you all. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the defense may soon rest its case in the Olympian attempted murder trial. Plus, could new information lead to a break in the case? We take a closer look at the unsolved murders out of Delphi, Indiana. Welcome back. Half a decade after two young girls are brutally murdered in a rural Indiana town, new information could shed light on a potential suspect in the case. Law and Crime Daily Sierra Gillespie joins us now to explain what could be a break in the Delphi double homicide.
It's a case that's captivated the nation, but has been unsolved for more than 5 years. But those following the investigation closely tell me new information could soon lead to answers.
You think about how insulated Delphi is. It's no cosmopolitan. It's the heartland. It's where stuff like this just doesn't happen.
But on February 13th, 2017, the sleepy town of Delphi, Indiana changed forever when 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German went for a hike on a nearby trail. This Snapchat photo is one of the last known photos taken by the girls. One day later, their bodies were discovered in a double homicide that shook the Midwest. In the more than 5 years since the grisly murders, few questions have been answered, including how they were killed. Investigators releasing only this image and brief video clip said to have been taken by the girls while on the high bridge. But in December of last year, police announced Instagram and Snapchat user Anthony Schatz was connected to the case. Later investigations found the real man behind the account was 27-year-old Kegan Kline, who now faces more than 30 charges relating to child pornography and exploitation. The newest twist in the case came just last month when creators of the Murder Sheet podcast uncovered a deeper connection.
As I started reading it and seeing those names and some of the details, I was just shocked and horrified by what I was reading.
It was pure coincidence that Kevin Greenlee and Anya Kane stumbled upon the nearly 200 pages of interview documents, where Kline admits to investigators he spoke with Liberty German on the day she was killed.
There wasn't so much any single smoking gun, devastating detail, but there was an accumulation of little small things that seemed one by one to build a pretty strong case. For instance, there were some web searches that Kegan did. He did a search on how long does DNA last on a body. That's an interesting thing for a person who may be involved in a murder case to be looking up.
Behind the scenes, it seems like police conducted this very well thought out interview with Kegan Kline. And I think there's been a lot of online speculation that, the investigation has stalled or the police aren't really doing anything. And I think what, at the very least, this transcript shows is that, things are moving in a certain direction at this point. And it looks like a lot of work is being done toward that end.
Forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan has covered the case since it broke in 2017. He says DNA could be the key to solving the murders.
Even when you have a negative finding in, say, testing and forensics, that's a good thing, because immediately you can eliminate things. And that puts you down a different path. So there is no good or bad when you think about negative, positive. It's what direction is it ultimately going to take the investigation.
But the search for answers in the case still as crucial as ever.
Anybody that would do this is still out there. They need to be removed from the general population. It is, in my view, they're dangerous. They're very, very dangerous.
Indiana State Police won't confirm the contents of that newly released interview and say it wasn't put out by police or the Delphi Double Homicide Task Force. Right now, the investigation into the murders is still ongoing. Reporting for Law and Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.
Law and Crime legal analyst Dr. Tracy Pearson and co-host Terry Austin join us again as we examine new documents in the search of a murderer. Terry, do these new documents point to a strong new lead or, unfortunately, or potentially another dead end in trying to solve this murder mystery?
Look, this looks like one of the strongest leads they've had so far. They now have a name, Kegan Kline. That is huge. They also know where he is. And with that information, they can do the DNA evidence, they can do forensic evidence, and they've interviewed him already. So they can trace back everything that he said in all of those documents. They know what his physical stature is. They know the clothing that he was wearing on that day. And fortunately, we have that video that Libby took, the last thing she did probably before she died. So hopefully they can get to it.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Pearson, to Terry's point, the law enforcement seems to have something at least to work with. So what's likely to be their next move in solving these murders?
There's a saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And with the release of this transcript and the publication of it, it's going to bring people forward who may have information. So the police will be taking telephone calls and receiving tips and be sussing those out. That'll lead to more forensic evidence, like digital evidence, like was found on Instagram and on Snapchat. And with more evidence, it'll be able to establish a much clearer path to locating the suspect and charging that individual to get them off the streets.
Yeah, let's hope with more eyes and more sunlight, as you said in this case, we get more answers as this case develops. When we come back, a jury in New Jersey may soon begin deliberating in the Olympian attempted murder trial. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, who the defense calls as some of its final witnesses. Welcome back. The defense team calls the defendant psychiatrist to the stand in the ongoing New Jersey trial for ex-Olympian, Michael Barisone. Barisone is facing 2 counts of attempted murder after he shot Lauren Canarak in the chest twice and shot her then boyfriend, Robert Goodwin, back in 2019. The dispute followed ongoing back and forth arguments about Canarak and Goodwin's living arrangement on Barisone's farm. At the time of the shooting, the two were living in an apartment on Barisone's property while he trained Canarak in dressage horseback riding. Barisone's defense team argued he feared for his life at the time of the shooting and suffered from mental health issues. The defendant's psychiatrist testified on Wednesday about the deteriorating relationship between Barisone and Canarak. And on cross-examination, he told jurors about the pattern which emerged in Barisone.
Doctor, you testified on direct examination that Mr. Barisone was depressed and preoccupied with Ms. Canarak?
Correct.
And you based that in part on review of the various Facebook posts and social media posts that he told you that he was reviewing?
Well, that, statements by other witnesses, I can't name all of them, but there were a lot of people who were interviewed who were seeing the same thing and felt helpless to do anything about it. Everybody seemed to see a train wreck coming, but nobody seemed to know what to do about it. People on the farm were concerned about the welfare of Michael Barisone. They saw the man they really cared for deteriorating, but they were not concerned about their personal safety. It was only Barisone who was afraid that Lauren Canarak was going to kill him.
He was the only one that was afraid.
Correct. That he was going to be killed by Canarak.
Dr. Pearson, I'm watching Barisone's body language, and we've got to assume because the case is moving forward, he's competent to stand trial. But as you see him, are there some question marks about that?
Yes, I would agree with you. He's presumed competent. However, the lawyer, if he is not able to assist in his defense, would have to bring that to the court's attention. I think that what is most concerning to me is that having been a trial lawyer, you're engaging with your client. And although he isn't on the camera, isn't on the lawyer at all times, and with the client at all times because we're looking at the witness, I am concerned about the body language because there isn't a connection between the two of them. And you would think that there would be.
Yeah, it seems very bizarre. Terry, Dr. Simmering was on the stand most of the morning. Do you think his testimony supported the claim that Barisone was mentally ill at the time of the shooting?
You know, I really thought Dr. Simmering was an excellent witness for the defense. He was brilliant. His background, Columbia, NYU, Bellevue. And not only that, he had the psychiatry, but he was also an expert in forensic psychiatry. So that means he can put the law together with that psychiatry. So he also testified for both the defense and the prosecution. He even mentioned that he had testified for Christopher Schellhorn, who is the prosecutor in this case. So I thought he reviewed all the documents, spoke to everyone who was involved. He said that he spoke to Barisone 5 times just alone. And so I thought he had all the background information. And most importantly, Brian, he was able to establish that based on all of the review of all of that evidence, that there was delusional disorder and persistent depressive disorder, all that you need, that he didn't know the difference between right and wrong.
Yeah, I've never seen a defense and mental illness defense work together, but we'll see. Thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.